Oh my gosh. We're old.
Well, hello. Thank you all for being here. My name is Serge Blais. I'm Director of Continuing Ed, working with Carolyn Keeley on this new initiative. So welcome to the University of Ottawa. I see familiar faces. I'm told we have to say familiar faces, not old faces, as I once said. Familiar faces in the room. We also have people, I understand, from all the way up in Yellowknife, and who knows, from elsewhere around the world. So welcome all at the University of Ottawa. Really, really happy to have you here. Really happy to report back on what's been a very, very successful cohort up to now, nearing the end now, and another couple of weeks to go. It's been hugely successful, among other things because of Carolyn, of course, but also because of the participants in the room. There's active participation, I'm told, in the groups, and we've seen it at action. We've even seen it on social media, and I thank you for that, for having promoted the program on social media and given your feedback there. I think we've delivered on the promise there. I mean, the purpose of continuing education is not to be too theoretical, although there is some of that, obviously, but to have very applicable knowledge, very practical knowledge and skills that you can bring back to your workplace for your own professional development and for your organization's benefit as well. So I'll take the opportunity to thank Carolyn Keeley publicly. I think she's worth thanking. As well as Bev and Kayla, who've made it happen, and my good buddy Paul Grenon here, who these guys have handled all the behind the scenes, the under the hood logistics, if you will, that really make or break the success of a program. I will do a sales pitch for the next cohort. The next cohort is in May. It's already half full, and it is limited seating, so we maybe have another, 10 or so, maybe 12 seats, so I may be sounding like a salesman, which I am in some way, but that cohort is filling, and the one after that won't be till, I guess, late in the fall, October it is. So we encourage you to sign up as soon as you can, and as we always say, if money, budgets is an issue, talk to us, and we can make arrangements for stretching it over a period of time or something like that if that's an issue. And there is more information in the brochure here that I hope you all have about this upcoming next cohort. All right, so enjoy lunch. We're allowed seconds and thirds, and dessert is included in the price, of course, right?
Yes, sir.
There you go. So I'll pass it over to Caroline. Thank you, Caroline, for organizing this.
Merci, Serge. Merci, Serge, et bienvenue tout le monde. I'm absolutely delighted to see that we've got a full house here for our session on communities of practice, a very, very hot topic that we're seeing emerge among many, many of our clients. And as Serge mentions, we are doing a live webcast of today's session, which is a first for us at the Institute for Strategic Communications and Change. So a shout out to folks who are watching in real time on the webcast. We know that we have colleagues up in the Government of Northwest Territories in Yellowknife tuning in, as well as folks from across the country. So that's really exciting to be able to be part of something bigger today. I am absolutely delighted to be able to welcome as our special guests Zoe Raymer, who is the Director of Corporate Communications with the Government of Northwest Territories, and Catherine Boyd, who is the Strategic Policy and Planning Analyst in the Government of Northwest Territories, both of whom work in the Department of the Executive in Corporate Communications. And I would say that it has been a highlight of my career over the last 15 years as a consultant to have an occasion to work with these magnificent, talented, soulful folks who bring a level of heart, a level of savvy and strategic thinking that I have rarely seen. And in particular, they are breaking new ground in terms of communities of practice and how that can really be an engine of change, how it can be a tool for performance, for alignment, for breaking down barriers, and for really collaborating to a whole new level. So I think this is an absolute treat and a rare opportunity for us to learn from what I would say is sort of the Olympic leagues of difficulty here in terms of communication. So we really appreciate your taking the time and effort to leave Yellowknife and to come landing in our ice storm. That was not ideal on Monday to be part of today's session. So really what this is intended as is very much just an informal chat which is a fit because, of course, communities of practice are all about tapping into informal sources of power in terms of influence and building that grassroots engagement. It's about working at the root level instead of tinkering with the leaves. And I think there's lots that we can learn from this extraordinary case study in the government of Northwest Territories. So we will set the stage a little bit to give you some context, and then I'll be asking some questions, and of course are very keen to invite questions from participants also. So then, without further ado, I will hand it off to Zoe to give us a few remarks in terms of context. Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you, Carolyn, and Serge, thank you very much, and folks for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and listen to us, and may I say, it is informal. I'm sitting in my Tom Cruise approach here. I won't leap off the couch, and
well, that's a relief. Not this time.
or at least not by practice or plan. And yeah, it wasn't all that hard to leave Yellowknife, I'm just going to say. It was minus 37, and so yesterday was delightful, the day before, interesting. I forgot my boots, or my skates, one or the other, but thanks again for having us, and Carolyn has been working with us in the government of the Northwest Territories for a couple, well, almost 2 years now. Apparently we need some help, and so we appreciate that. Just a little context setting. How many of you have been to the Northwest Territories? Holy crap. Right on. Okay, that is excellent. How many of you have lived in the Northwest Territories? Oh, Ingrid.
Excellent.
How many of you have worked for me? Oh, Ingrid, look at Kath. Thank you. Carolyn, excellent. So a little quiz on the Northwest Territories. How far is it from Ottawa? Give or take 100 or 2 kilometers. 3,500? It's close-ish. How many? 2,400. You got to go a little bit further away. Almost 5,000 kilometers from here. So do you think we have Starbucks? No. No, Whitehorse has Starbucks. Whitehorse is entirely more hip than Yellowknife, but we do call it North Light. It's kind of like northern British Columbia. Yeah. Where's the nearest, how far do you think our nearest Starbucks is? It's in Edmonton. It's about 1,500 kilometers away. So, you know, that's one thing. We have 42,000 people stretched over, I don't know, something like 1.3 million kilometers of landmass. 13% of Canada's landmass in the Northwest Territories, 33 communities. Did I say that? Yeah. 11 official languages. I tested Kath on this earlier, and she passed. I won't make you do it in front of all of these people. And we are one of 2 jurisdictions in the country where Aboriginal people form the majority of our population. It's a fantastic place to live. I've lived there for 28 years, and I came up to be a broadcast journalist. And at the time there was, and still is, only 3 radio stations, but radio was extremely important in the history of the Northwest Territories, and certainly at the time. But now we are fully engaged in the wired world and the not so wired world, and we have the same advantages that all of you have with respect to you know, social media, and in fact, in some cases, online services are the way to go in such a remote jurisdiction with so few people and so few points of service. The government of the Northwest Territories, my employer, I did work for the Government of Canada for 21 years and moved to work with the Government of the Northwest Territories. We have about 5,000 employees distributed amongst those communities, and we have, and this is where we'll start to make it real for you, we have, our budget is about $1.5, $1.6 billion, 5,000 employees, 14 departments, and just around 25 communicators. And so if you look at ratios, when I worked for the federal government, I was a director of a communications group in a small regional office in a line department in a large government, and I had 13 communicators working for me. So one of the challenges that we have is a lot, and this is where Carolyn speaks to the Olympic size nature of our challenge, but we have to make the best of the many talents that we have, and one of the most, I guess, the best surprises I had, and I'm not sure why it was a surprise, because many of the folks I had worked with as a federal communicator, but we have some fantastic communications professionals that work within the GNWT across those 14 departments. And one of the challenges that they face, and it may be the same in your organizations, is the value of communications. And I don't think my bosses or my colleagues in the GNWT would argue the value of communications was perhaps not as strong as it could have been, and those folks were then working hard as communications professionals to do the job that they had been hired to do in an environment that perhaps didn't lend their talents enough focus or allow them to demonstrate the full suite of skills they have. So that's sort of the environment that we work in, and it's a challenge every day, but a great pleasure and privilege to work there.
Excellent. So that is terrific context just in terms of the government of Northwest Territories environment, and so we're really speaking here of developing then a community of practice among the communications professionals, and as Zoe mentioned, so you've got roughly 25 people who are split across 14 departments. So you can imagine with an enormous challenge to communicate highly complex, often very sensitive content, particularly in a context of consensus government, which I've found one of the very numerous things that I've learned about that certainly makes things different and adds a level of legitimacy, which is great, but also a level of complexity. The challenge is enormous, and so I will pass it off to Catherine, who's going to tell us about then how a community of practice was formed and how it has really helped step up and raise the game in terms of performance of a small but mighty team. Catherine is the superstar organizer and visionary behind the community of practice, and I think we have a ton to learn from her strategic approach and also her nurturing approach to creating and cultivating this community of practice over time. So Catherine.
Okay, so why did we create a community of practice you were supposed to talk about, but you forgot?
See, I'm always forgetting. It's because I'm older.
A few years ago, we began, I guess it was at the same time as devolution, when our government was taking on more responsibility for administering programs and services and being responsible for land and resource management. That was sort of the context within which we took a look at a number of other things that our government does, and one of them was the communications function that, well, as Zoe has described, it existed, had been sort of sorely neglected for almost 20 years when they disbanded the Department of Culture and Communications and left each department to figure out on their own how to communicate. And so we began this review, and there's lots of findings and recommendations and things that have happened as a result of that review. But one of the things that was highlighted was sort of the lack of capacity of our communications function to really deliver on the results we wanted. And so we set off to support this group of professional, dedicated staff that were sort of doing the best they could. And so we made a deliberate, well, I guess at the time, I don't think we would have thought of it as a community of practice, but we made a deliberate decision to separate the business lines and decision making and what we had to do around government processes and communication, and carve out some time and a forum for communicators to get together as a network of professionals and to share and to learn. And so that was very deliberate. And, as good government people, we wrote a terms of reference. I'm not sure if anybody approved it other than ourselves, but, to make it clear for everybody, this is what the purpose is and who's invited. So it was any and all GNWT communications staff at the time were invited to join, and so people self-identified. Zoe is our, I would say, host. As the Director of Corporate Communication, she has the responsibility for the health and professional capability of the function, and so sort of under her guidance, we made a dedicated time, so we of course change, we're flexible, but we have one session a month that we guarantee, and then as other things come up or as necessary, was created, how it works. So again, I try to coordinate, but we rely on our team, our practitioners, to bring forward ideas, to suggest ideas, to volunteer, to deliver and participate. And I try and from all that weave together an agenda, and we've also done sort of an annual survey to try and what are your top priorities for learning and development, what do you need to do your job, and then we go out and try and find that. So we have a combination of formal learning and informal learning.
And if I can just jump in, I think for me as an outside observer and a fortunate contributor then to the community, what's different is that when I look at frankly most of the clients that we work with in Ottawa, you will have a formal committee or a working group, and they have a sort of very structured series of meetings and so on. And the vibe is totally different. It tends to be a top-down thing where there's going to be a set agenda. People are going to be told what to do. So it's going to be, let's all get together and be spoken to in terms of what expectations are, or sometimes, dealing with difficult news or really trying to essentially correct behavior or direct it. In the GNWT context, whether it's part of your culture or just the savvy, the whole dynamic is turned around. So it's more of an invitation and a platform to come together and create in a way that's quite organic and bottom up.
Well, yes, that's very true, but we screwed it up to start with. Okay. And that's how it resulted. But I mean, I think what folks would say, and we started that way with a meeting where it was us in corporate communications, and we had lots of things to tell people, which form to fill out and which planning template to use, and why this month wasn't the best time to organize that event and the like. But I think, Carolyn, one of the things that we realized quickly was the structure of our meetings was top down, and so I would blither on incessantly about those things, and folks would be, they'd leave edified, but perhaps not excited about what their work was. And I know, at least for us now, and it remains to be seen as we hear from our colleagues who participate, but for us, that meeting is definitely the highlight of our month, and it is because it is driven under Catherine's capable guidance, but from the folks themselves who share their talents and skills with their colleagues in a way that allows for them to learn. That's not to say that we don't have organized learning events, and Carolyn was, in fact, one of our first educators who brought her particular skill set and her results map methodology to us and helped us figure out how to make that work for us in our organization. That was a more formal kind of construct where we took a few days and allowed everyone to have the opportunity to experience that.
Excellent. So maybe, Catherine, if you can share a little bit about your experience in terms of the kinds of activities or the kinds of issues that you bring to bear. How does this actually work in practice in your community of practice?
Okay, so as I mentioned, I try and have a yearly plan where I solicit ideas from everybody, and from that try and see some themes. So you start with a yearly plan, but then that keeps changing. But also just putting the call out, and I was pleasantly surprised by our colleagues who have risen to it and volunteer, and they're like, oh, I can do a session on some examples, and I think most people here are communicators, although I know there are other communities of practice represented here, but just somebody who is an employee in the GNWT is like, oh, I'll do a session for my colleagues on how to write effective narratives, and somebody else is, oh, I'm really good at web analytics, and that's something most of us, including me, struggle with, and they organize, they determine, and so our time is a 2-hour block, and I sort of say to the person who volunteers to do a peer learning teaching session, you can take as little or as long, like if you want the whole 2 hours, you can have the whole 2 hours. If you want 10 minutes, you can take 10 minutes. And so it's sort of up to them. And then I think that excites and inspires other people. They say, oh, well, Umesh talked about web analytics. I know about communication support to public engagement, and I'll volunteer for the next session. And so we're just building on the strengths of our team that are out there, and it's not always external consultants. Sorry, sometimes it is, but we have a lot of bench strength there, a lot of years of experience, and just trying to share that. Some of it's very informal, like just lessons learned, like how did you do this? And it's just very informal sharing of how you implemented something, what worked, what didn't. Starts conversations that maybe wouldn't happen, and then it's built to sort of network across that they don't always call us now, they'll call each other when they have a project they need to work on and they need help. So,
and I would say, again, for me to be able to observe this, what is really exciting is that if you can imagine, you've got some very talented, passionate people, 25 odd communicators who are divided into 14 departments. The GNWT has to find a creative way to get to a place where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, because otherwise you've got this talent locked in the box, if you like. If you've got somebody who's got this great social media talent, but she's working in one department, well, how do you bump that up and cross-fertilize in a way that develops organically and that's mutually supportive? And so there's something cultural that's quite interesting to this, as distinct from a sort of more traditional parochial way of doing things. Also, what's interesting is this concept that communicators are, in essence, invited. So first of all, it's not mandatory to come, but everybody clamors to be there. So that's also kind of social proof that this is an important thing and that we want to participate. And that it invites communicators to be, if you will, producers of change as opposed to passive consumers of change. So if we're going to do, for example, I was involved in a process to change the approach to strategic communications planning using this results map process. First of all the thousands of communicators we've worked with on this, the GNWT are absolutely the superstars, where they actually have developed and co-created results map tools for communications planning that work in their context. So they've sort of riffed on our basis and created their own approaches and tools and templates, which I think is a terrific example of true capacity building that has roots and that has a sustainable effect, as opposed to just get some speaker come in and leave, and it's sort of a one-shot wonder approach. So there's something to the legitimacy and to the concept of an invitation to create the thing that we're working on together that I think is really powerful.
Yeah, and Carolyn, I think what we've learned is that the organization is better. We don't all work in one little building in downtown Yellowknife, although you might think we could. But we, and in terms of sort of, are we spread out? Well, yes, indeed, we're spread out, but across a small city, which wherein we might be 2 blocks away. But the divide is still there, and our government as a whole, like many larger organizations, tends to operate in silos. And those silos are both not conducive to the end result of communication on behalf of, the organization, and particularly on behalf of citizens who we serve. And so when we can make the connections across those silos with communicators who are specially trained to reach out in a way that has impact for the end user, I think that's really valuable for us. And breaking down the silos so that they can share their expertise. But we've, as Catherine said, we've opened up our community of practice, if you will, to any communication practitioner that we know of. In many ways, we've got other organizations who join us, quasi-governmental organizations like our Workers' Safety and, I can't do the acronym. WSCC is the acronym, compensation folks. We open the invitation to those from Aboriginal governments that have capacity in communications who wish to come. We've invited the federal government and their communicators to join us. And, from time to time we have very specific issues that we have to deal with. We try and keep that to an appropriate time on the agenda and an appropriate amount of the agenda. So the idea of sharing that practice is really useful to us because we learn from them as well.
Excellent. And one of the most fun events that I remember hearing about, and I'm going to call upon you, Catherine, to explain the GNWT Peep Show that you've organized as part of the communications community. You want to tell us a little bit about the Peep Show?
So last year was a time of significant change, not just in communications in the GNWT, but overall, and we wanted to have a way of sort of celebrating and sharing some successes rather than always being trodden down. And so good tip, call something really alluring like the Peep Show, and you'll get people really curious and want to be part of it, or half the people then's like, I'm not doing that, that's weird. But it was just a fancy name for a career, what do you call it, like a trade show. So we invited a call to action for all of our communicators to bring a sample of their Pride projects from the year to share with their colleagues, because quite often we don't take time to do that. And so it started as, so everybody will get together, we'll have some food and drink, and you can walk around and mingle with your colleagues and just see what they've produced and done and learn from them that way. But then we built on that, and I think this is one thing that's really important in communities of practice is the celebration. And so we created an awards ceremony, and people didn't have to apply or nominate for their awards. We created them, and we created one for every one of our 14 departments, because sometimes people don't actually recognize that the work they're doing is really important and or valued, especially if you're a communicator in some line department that nobody actually knows who you are. So it was a lot of fun, and I forgot my list, but basically I tried to recognize where people had implemented some of our new practices, used new templates, had tried new things, and as we say, we just made certificates, but the write-ups, I think, themselves were worth the award.
Yeah,
so
it's sort of this idea of having a bit of fun so that you're offering something of value and having that absolutely essential renewable source of positive energy, of celebrating success with these awards. So these are not, expensive awards that are going to be a problem in a government context, just a certificate and that real authentic appreciation and validation and celebration of success. I should mention that we've got a couple of examples of such products that I'll be tweeting out this afternoon using the ISCC hashtag, which is for the Institute of Strategic Communications and Change. So on Twitter, if you search for ISCC, you can follow along the conversation from today, but also get some examples that will be circulated around later throughout the day. And I think you'll find some really terrific examples of communication products and campaigns that speak to this level of resourcefulness and of doing more with less. That is very much the GNWT reality. Maybe what I can do is just take a quick break and see if there may be some questions or comments from the audience, because we're very happy to hear from your reactions, or if you have any questions. I know many of you are tasked with setting up communities of practice. For the sake of our webcast, we will just ask if you wouldn't mind going to the mic that's over there next to Brenda. But very happy to hear your questions, if you have any that you'd like to pose to Catherine and Zoe.
And I can share my mic with anyone.
Yes.
Which will come as a surprise to many of my colleagues and friends.
Any questions? Brenda, thank you.
I'm curious to know how you arrived at the once-a-month schedule for your meetings. What fed into the decision to do it once a month as opposed to a few times a year?
I think initially it was because we were implementing a lot of new processes, and there was a lot of change going on, and it was just an opportunity for people to come together. So I think that's how we ended up with the once a month, but then the fact that everybody kept coming every month encouraged us, and we actually did, because at one point we were hearing not from the communicators themselves, but from other people. I think people are jealous that they get so much attention, and so they meet too often, and so we sort of put it out there to the group, is once a month too often? This is for you. If you want to meet less, we can, and the resounding answer was no. And so I think that's how we ended up at it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that there are different scales of events, and so our monthly meeting is one type of event that we have, and we can plan for that. But oftentimes opportunities present themselves, such as webinars and the like. And so Catherine is also kind of scanning the horizon for those sorts of things, and then we'll have an impromptu call out. Guess what? Tomorrow there's a webinar on X, Y, or Z. Bring yourself over to our building, and we'll try and find you some snacks, and we'll enjoy that together and have a discussion afterwards. And we really try and do that afterward, is to have a conversation about. See you, Kayla.
Have fun in Iceland, Kayla. She's trying to be discreet.
Yes. we really try and have a conversation in those cases about how does that apply in our milieu, because it's not always evident from the conversation,
Right.
but more often what's interesting is how people have made the connection immediately and have already started down the path of, oh, because I saw that and I heard this, I'm going to try that over here, which is truly the benefit.
Excellent. Great stuff. We have Asha, who is one of our cohort participants in the January cohort at the Institute. Go ahead.
Hi, it's lovely to meet both of you. I was wondering if you could tell me how did you get the budget to do some of these things, like hold trade shows and stuff like that? Because I imagine it must cost money, some of what you're doing, and where did you find that money?
Sure. Well, that's a really good question. So one of the things that Catherine mentioned was that as we went through this period of organizational change after we received some of the jurisdictions from the federal government into the GNWT, we had a review of the communications function. And within the context of that review, as Catherine pointed out, there were a number of findings, not the least of which was a real necessity to capitalize on the staff that we have and build the capacity and continue the professional development of communicators, particularly since the function and by extension the people within the function had been perhaps neglected somewhat for a couple of decades. And so, in fact, we were provided government-approved budget to do this, but it isn't, reams and reams of dollars. And so what we try and do is make that money go as far as possible. And I think that, and I'm pretty protective of that money. You work in an organization where people try and steal your money and put that money to different uses. Well, they can take other bits of my budget, but for me, that piece is sacrosanct, and we try and apply it in different ways. The Peep Show, for example, cost us, I don't know, $200 maybe?
Maybe 300 with snacks.
Oh, 300 with snacks, right. And so we look for low-cost ways to do things, but the group learning dynamic is one where, because we have the ability to bring people together in one location, we can maximize the use of those funds to everyone's benefit. But I wouldn't say that we have scads of money to do this, and I really challenge you, and we're happy to provide any of our experiences in this way, to look within and find ways of capitalizing. So when we're having peer-led learning sessions, I don't know if we give them a Fairfax buff or something for having participated.
Now, Fairfax, if we can just
Oh,
translate,
gee, yeah, it's not the...
is not the strip club in the Byward
Shoot.
Market, but rather is Bear, B-E-A-R, Facts, which is their newsletter. We need some
I always forget
cross-cultural
what-
translation
Yes,
here,
that's
Zoe.
right.
Yeah.
Although
often-
one of our Peep Show awards was the Bear It All Award.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
the Bear and All
indeed.
Award. Yes.
Forget where I am from time to time.
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess, and we're happy to provide any thoughts we can on maximizing budget. It doesn't have to cost a lot, and the results are worth it, on a per capita return on investment kind of scenario.
Absolutely. And I would say, having been a fortunate participant in these kinds of things, people bring their own cookies and muffins to share and so on. So there's a real convivial community vibe about it also that, it's not fancy, but there's an authenticity and a real level of engagement that is worth a lot more than a catered lunch, I would say. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Susan Davis. I had the privilege of being in Yellowknife last June, about the 18th, so it was a wonderful experience, that almost endless night, which was wonderful. So I run a community of practice for we do send out emails to up to 300 people, but across the country, there's a large group in the National Capital Region, but it's multidisciplinary. I manage the content for our department's, our web content, and we're in a mode to move to Canada.ca to centralize our sources, or our content. And as part of that, it's multidisciplinary. We have communicators, content owners from the programs. We have editors. So we're reaching out that way. So that's one thing is have you dealt with sort of reaching out to people outside of the community of Yellowknife? How do you bring them in? And we've started to use webinars and WebExes as well. The other one is on the communication side of it. I was just in Halifax, Dartmouth area for the last couple of days, and we've realized that we've left our communicators out of, the strategic communicators out of the process. We haven't left them out, but they haven't had time to be involved. So that would be the second one, is how to, have you thought about reaching out beyond communications? You said there's some interest from jealous people. And you are involving communicators outside of it. But the other is, more importantly, I think for us right now, we need that support, and we need to help. It's not just what we need. I mean, it's these other communicators. Sorry, they were mentioning it, they're afraid of the web now. Right. So any thoughts on how to bring this community across the country together virtually? So
there's I guess a couple of things that, and Kath, I'll let you speak to how we might reach out to other communities with whom we share a natural affinity, or perhaps we might even have thought we work at cross purposes at some time, but at some points in time, but we want to bring them in. So I'll let you speak to that. But in terms of reaching out, I guess what I would say is we in the GNWT, our communicators and the folks that we deal with are co-located within the city of Yellowknife, and so we haven't had much experience in trying to reach out to others. And I think that what we're working on as an organization within the GNWT is collaboration and tools that we can use to further collaboration, and often those are web-based tools. And so this is a topic of some conversation amongst our colleagues who work in the Office of the Chief Information Officer and the like, and how do we build collaboration tools online in a way that is can be utilized by small communities where bandwidth and web access are challenging. And so I wouldn't say we have the answers there yet in terms of that sort of reaching out, but one thing I'll just say is we're not we as the GNWT right now are not the only ones who are looking for ways to build communities of practice, and the North is one big experiment on building communities of practice and governments and other things. And one of the things that I'm really proud of in terms of what Northern communicators have done is we organized a Northern Communications Conference, and it was, there were, over the course of 3 or 4 years, there was one in Whitehorse, one in Yellowknife, and one in Iqaluit. And it was organized by a team of volunteers, in many cases from within the federal communications community in those 3 territories, but was a place for all communicators, irrespective of what type of organization they worked for, public, private, parapublic organizations, individuals who had consulting practices. And we all across the North faced similar challenges, and so brought to bear the ultimate community of Northern communications practitioners. And while that is, an expensive proposition in terms of, and you can imagine, costs of travel and the like, it was also one of the most invigorating opportunities, and people still talk about that. So any way you can find to bring people together around a common set of challenges and liberate their passion for what it is that they're doing is useful. So if that's just, in the oldie days was teleconferences. God forbid I had so many teleconferences with Ottawa. I can still tell you what the federal government audio conference number is, 1-866. Anyway, 885 something.
Yes.
But that's what I would say. But then we also have colleagues within the GNWT who I think we work with naturally and who from time to time have asked to be part of our
Kath, do you want to add in
I'm
terms
not
of
sure
your
if it
perspective?
really answers your question at all, but yes, as Zoe said, so sometimes it's bringing other colleagues in because that's what communicators want to know about in order to do their job. Sometimes the other colleagues want to join us because, oh, that seems fun, and we let them, but we're like, our focus is on communications practices, and then they realize, well, really, I need my own community of practice over here, so thanks for letting me see that, I'm gonna go away. And then the one thing that, so our communications community has identified in order for them really to be successful and for the government to reach citizens, and a lot of other people need to know about what it is we do, and so that's one project we have on the go is creating a sort of Comms 101 module and offering that to non-communications people. So and so hopefully through webinars or in person or various means that we can spread the gospel a little bit.
Yes, that actually is a really great point, because from what I've observed, there is also the issue of creating the conditions for the community to flourish. And often you do find this, communicators say, well, that's great. I'm keen to be focused on strategic planning and I want to evaluate, but then I bump up against a brick wall because my internal clients don't wish to engage this way and they're put off by it. So then we've got to sort of socialize this way of working among those internal clients. So that sort of outreach of the community is probably an important enabler.
And I know there's somebody with a question, but just also there, like we have one person that's not within Yellowknife, so a combination of webinar, teleconference, and when it's a more formal or a longer event, he will fly into Yellowknife. It's obviously cheaper to bring one person in than 25 out, but that's
absolutely,
to date it's pretty organic, and we do have a private, what would you call it? See, I'm not the techie person. Website, like the shared resources.
Oh, right.
So you know, most of our community practice is face to face and meeting and from each other, but we do have a place where there are resources, and Zoe has started a Yammer site that, you know, throughout the month if people had questions, they could, but that's sort of maybe where we're going next.
Excellent.
So,
Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is John Sims. Thank you very much for this. It's absolutely fascinating. One of the things that really caught my attention, I'd like to pick up on a bit, is one of you said that what you get is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's magic. I don't quite understand how that works. I've read about it, but I'd really like to understand that, so you avoid the opposite, which would be the blind leading the blind. You've tapped into something which is very special. How do you know it works? I mean, one test would be, I suppose, Elizabeth or Catherine, you talked about volunteers coming and they're excited, and do volunteers come back and report that they learned something too? That would be a bit of a test. Or what are the elements you need to make that magic work?
So we haven't done any formal evaluation. I would say the law of 2 feet has been our evaluation indicator to date, is that people continue to come, and it's sort of standing room only because we don't get a room this size. You know, we don't want. And the people that volunteer are they're the next day they're just sitting in the room. So yeah, I think the fact that people come every month and volunteer to participate is one indicator. I think probably we should, in my survey when I'm seeking ideas for next year, I should do a bit of follow-up. And I did send out to all of them in advance of this, is there anything like lessons learned or what hasn't worked? I mean, it hasn't all been perfect.
No, absolutely.
And there's, but I didn't get a lot of feedback because, of course, they're busy doing their thing.
Yeah.
I think, you know, one of the things like that, and see, I can never get the statement correct. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. If you can't get the idiom right, you should probably not use it, Zoe. But oh well. It's the thought behind that that's really important. And I think that you know, what I see in the room is that magic, which is, as our colleague Joe starts to tell us about storytelling as a technique in the construct of corporate narratives, and then suddenly somebody is able to pick that thread up and say, oh, I could use this way. So the conversation goes very quickly from the ephemeral and philosophical to the practical and useful. And so where people start to say, oh, I can use it in this way, then you start to develop that's the sort of extra sauce, if you will, special sauce on that extra special sauce, where folks are able to build practical ideas. And I think you don't know until you ask what that degree of skill set is in those individuals who, on the surface of it, are performing the same job in different locations for, you know, slightly different purposes. But who knew that our friend Joe had this absolute dynamic skill set around storytelling as a function of a communications practitioner's toolkit, or that our friend Umesh was as skilled as he was in applying web analytics to communications needs. And, you know, I had no clue about either of those. And I'm a better communicator for having had that opportunity.
Yeah. And again, if I can just jump in on that, I think if you look at it just in terms of the sheer issue of talent management, that you've got some very high-performing people who have relatively limited career mobility and options because it's a small community, and if you're in the government context, then that sphere is relatively limited. And so I think this is a huge issue from a pure HR perspective in terms of recruitment and retention, that you have to be able to provide some organic opportunities for career growth and development that then just sort of takes off organically. And that, I think, is, to your point in terms of the secret sauce, that it's quite materially different. If you have a peer who's in a department who says, wow, you know what, I know how to do web analytics and here's how it works for me, then that is taking off and taking root in quite a different way than if you have some instructor, God forbid from Ottawa, land there and start spewing off that may or may not stick. So I think there's a level of sustainability and organic growth in that's quite important, because this is a critical function. The communications function is critical to the functioning of the government of Northwest Territories. So we have to make sure that there is a stable talent pool and that people have an opportunity to grow in ways that are informal and additional to the more formal hierarchical growth, for which there are opportunities, but relatively smaller, just given the size of the organization. Yeah.
I guess I think it was Brenda that had asked, how do we land on a month? Or just a couple of words of caution. So it sounds all organic and collaborative, and it is, but it also does take somebody, and that is my job, to behind the scenes to keep it going, and that commitment. Like, that's one thing to have that regular meeting. Yes, sometimes we have to cancel it or move it, but to make a commitment to get together and to hold us all accountable to that is really important. And I always think, oh, you know, it's not for another month, the communications community meeting. And it's like, so it does take time and effort. And so you have to carve, like I have to carve time out of, it is part of my job. So that's good news. But, you know, I have to make the time to make sure, you know, seek out from everybody, make sure we have the right room and the resources or whatever it is, and make sure people know and that type of thing.
Absolutely. And that is a great cautionary tale, because you are very much the wizard behind the curtain there in terms of actually making this happen, which is not insignificant in terms of level of logistics and finding the content and sharing practices and so on. So that a sustained level of enthusiasm and discipline is a critical factor, because it's providing that platform for the collaborative work and so on. But that if the platform were not there, then none of this would be possible. So I think that's a great testament to your contributions to actually make that possible. Yes, Susan.
I just wanted to comment about that. I now have a person more junior to me anyway, another member of my team, who is assisting with logistics, because I found it exhausting, you know, on top of the rest of my work. It is a web, we use WebEx, and because he's on there, I now have him. He set it up, he organizes it, and I can go to him with my agenda ideas, which is a huge help. So if you're trying to set it up, we do send out our invitation to 300 people, and we probably have an average of 80 people on the call. So we, you know, it does take work, and we're trying to create that sense of community over the phone and through the WebEx itself. But I do thank you again for some of the ideas you're suggesting. I think that, for example, in Halifax, we met with a biology scientist, I forget her specific discipline, but she is a leader in many of the things that she's doing with our web content, and this is given, rather than necessarily even flying her into Ottawa, if that's a possibility, it's learning how to hand over that dot or something in a WebEx. What is it when you hand the ball over? Or you can, you know, you pass the screen to the next person. But this might be an opportunity, you know, for her to reach back to our community of practice, and we do find that some people are engaged and will speak up. But it is, I have to say, it is a challenge over the phone to try to, I'll call people out that I've spoken to over the phone, and they now know that I'll do that. You know, I'll call their name and say, we were discussing X, or somebody else in my team will do that now. So, and it's a mixture too with our community of practice, where we have up to 20, 25 people in the room, a lot of the web practitioners from the content side, even the publishing side of the house. and then we work with the people across the, so we're building up that we're becoming more of a community. But I have to say that I really like some of the words about magic and collaboration and nurturing and really, you know, looking at, that's all part of it. Is there a book? Has anybody read a book that could nurture ourselves as, you know?
A couple of resources, and again, I'll tweet these out this afternoon. For one thing, there's the Social Architecture Manifesto, and for those of you who are cohort participants, this is your reading for next week's session on communities of practice. And so this is a really great resource written by Luc Galopin out of Belgium. And his whole model is that you've got to work on the white spaces between the boxes on an organizational chart. We'll also be tweeting out next week, or I think in 2 weeks, a video interview that I did with him. So the Social Architecture Manifesto would be a recommended reading. There's lots of work by Henry Mintzberg on organizations as communities to engage as opposed to machines to fix. So Mintzberg has oodles of resources on his blog. And then finally, in terms of blogs, I'm just reminding myself that when I last had occasion to work with your team last November, we published a blog post and a video of a session that we'd done together on unlocking the community's potential. And so this is quite an interesting session where we had teams working in small groups and actually co-creating in a very visual way to try to identify, okay, what are the talents that we can unlock in our community? And then people would come and post them up on a big, huge craft paper wall that was put up in the cross-country ski lodge, if memory serves. And then you would find out that, okay, well, this one over here in this department is great at photography, and this one could help with language adaptation or whatever different skill sets that people may not have realized. And you can appreciate that there's something really powerful in that, in having an opportunity to work to your full scope of abilities, because somebody may have a day-to-day job where they don't have an opportunity to use that, and now we're identifying that, and we're finding an informal mechanism to bubble that talent up to the surface and have it apply to a greater purpose. So there is a blog post on that on our resultsmap.com blog, and it was filed in November, so that'll be easier to find. I think it was called On Community and something. On community and communications, probably. So that'll be easy to find. I think, Catherine, did you want to jump in?
It was a bit more about how do we know if it's working or not. So, I mean, I think it'll take more time to see how the communications function within the GNWT performs. But one recent example, like collectively as a team, we've sort of moved through this adoption of the results map and adapted it for our own needs, and that now has become, this is how GNWT communicators plan and implement their communications initiatives. And a couple of weeks ago, a new process was introduced to this group, and the immediate reaction is like, well, where does that fit in the results map? I don't see it on here, it doesn't fit in here. And so that's just an example of, you know, through solidarity and collaboration, we've all adopted one way, and when somebody tries now to tell us do something differently, it was like, right.
So I think actually that's one of the benefits of the idea of a community of practice, is just to have a common nomenclature of the way in which we're working. So people will say, for example, we'll do a public environment analysis. Well, what that means to one person could be different to another person, and then that causes a lot of friction and frustration in the system. Whereas here, because the whole community was exposed to a common approach and a common nomenclature, whether it's the right one or the wrong one, you know, one could debate, but the point being that we're level setting that so that it creates the conditions to make collaboration and exchange easier. Now, I'm mindful that we have only a little bit of time, so if anybody else wants to ask a question, I'll invite you up to the mic. Would be happy to hear from you, and while you think about that, I'll ask Catherine and Zoe if you have any advice for folks that are tasked with leading communities of practice, any kind of advice or lessons learned from your experience to share.
Well, as Zoe said, I ditto that it is the highlight of my month, and so my advice would be do it, because it's very rewarding, both professionally and personally, to work with within that community of practice. And as I mentioned, it does take a little bit of effort, so carve yourself out some time, but the rewards are worth it.
Great. Zoe?
No, I'll defer to the question asker.
Okay, and we have Marie-Danielle, who is also one of our superstar cohort members. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I found this very interesting. I just had one question because we belong to a sort of a diffuse community of practice, and one of the problems that we have, we're not as organized as you are, but one of the problems we have is finding an area to save those things. Who does the knowledge management of it? Is that your role? And if so, how do you protect that from other people, or does everybody have access to it? How does that work? Thanks.
It's a good question, and the more technologically advanced we get, the easier that is. And so, for example, you may find it interesting to know that the government of the Northwest Territories does not yet quite have an intranet, and so, but we are championing the cause. However, we do have what I would call a secure space on the web where all of our community professionals can access the information that we have, the outputs of our sessions, where they have the ability to find the tools that we use on a regular basis and can draw down on those. And it seems a simple thing. It's not particularly complicated or whatever. It's just what it is. I think what we're looking to do with our intranet is sort of build that idea of the sharing of knowledge and the management of knowledge across the organization writ large. And so our job is to kind of foster that both present and diffuse community of practice through the building of tools that will support the entire organization. So form has to, in a manner of speaking, has to follow function. And so if we say we're about collaboration, we have to build the tools that will allow people to do that. We live and work in an organization that has not yet transformed itself across a records management approach that allows everybody access to records. So we've done what we can within that context, but we try and use those kinds of tools to share that knowledge. And Catherine, is responsible for making sure that the information that we generate from those sessions, to the extent that it is documented to begin with, is available there. But all of our team in corporate communications, and I have to say that they are also a fantastic and inspiring bunch of folks who have offered to deliver sessions on behalf of the community of practice, but also who share the same kind of commitment and passion for maintaining that knowledge so that it isn't lost to those who may join us from other parts of the organization. We're also, in that context, able to share some of that information outside the organization as well. And so, to the extent that that's possible, we're happy to share some of that with folks here.
Excellent. That's a very important topic. Now I can see we're closing in on our time. Did you have a last remark?
Just really quick, we use a SharePoint site within our department. It's a collaboration space, but there's also GCpedia. If you're within the federal government, you might want to, you're not. And do you have a collaboration site at all?
That's another conversation, it
Right.
sounds like, yes.
Anyway,
but that's a great
within the
suggestion.
federal government or within your organization, if you have a collaboration, I apologize. It's been wonderful. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you very much. And just to build on this issue of content and making sure that information is available and easy to share, one thing that I will put out there is that today's session was not only a live webcast, but also will be videotaped and will be available on the Institute website. So that I encourage you to check out and share it with your colleagues, because that might be the source of some interesting conversations and exchange. And as we know, conversation is the smallest unit of change. And so if that video can be useful to kind of spring some new ideas and some points of collaboration with your colleagues, then we certainly hope that will be helpful. We will be tweeting out the link this afternoon, as well as other resources. For example, some of these examples of some really terrific videos that were done for a small budget, but a big impact from some of Catherine and Zoe's colleagues. So watch for that also on Twitter for the rest of the afternoon. In the meantime, I'm mindful that you all have busy jobs to get back to, so I do want to make sure to respect our limited time together. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to be a part of today's session. It's been an absolute treat and pleasure for me to be able to work yet again with Zoe and Catherine and share this beautiful case study with you, and I'm sure that they're both happy to continue to share insights online as a follow-up to today's session. So many, many thanks for being here.
Thank you
and
to
have
all
a great
of you.
rest of your day.
Yeah,
Thank
you very much.